We are live. This is Literary Roadhouse, one short story once a week. I'm Maya.
I'm Gerald.
I'm Anais.
And I'm Rammy.
And this week we are discussing Miss Temptation by Kurt Vonnegut. I'm really looking forward to this discussion, but first, if you don't like spoilers, please turn this off and come back after you've read the story, because this summary will be spoilerific. In this story, we follow Susanna, who is a young 19-year-old woman who is quite lovely, and every morning she walks through this small town with bells on her ankles, and she really is very noticeable in this small town, to the point where she is the highlight of everyone's day as she comes out every day. She is an actor, and she is very lovely, according to the story. And one day, she goes into town to get her daily newspaper, and there is a young soldier, fresh back from Korea, sitting in the soda booth, and he sees her and decides to open his mouth because he's had issues with beautiful women, and he finds her beautiful and offensive, and he gets into her face, and she's so upset that the next day she starts to leave town. And the next day, he goes to her home at the prodding of the pharmacist and realizes that this lovely lady is just a normal person like everyone else, as she chastises him and then convinces him to walk her back through town and make her feel like a normal person again. I think that is as short a summary as we can get.
Good
So, I'm really looking forward to reading the story, especially after the last few stories. So, let's just top level. How did everyone like it?
That's first reading, I didn't like it, and second reading, I didn't like it a bit less. So that's good.
Gerald, only you can say it the way you say it. How about you, Remy?
I liked it a lot.
And Annie?
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I really liked it. There was one thing in particular towards the end that took it from good to great, which we can discuss when we get there.
Definitely. I loved it as well. I loved how it was presented, and after reading it, I did some deep thought, and I saw a lot more in there, especially considering the year it was written, that I was very impressed. And I actually wish we had read this before the other story we read by Vonnegut, because I love this a lot more than the other story that we read, which was Bergeron or Harold
Bergeron.
Thank you. That story. That one was good, but this, to me, really shows his chops.
What year was this one written?
56. 1956. So, why don't we start with the themes of the story? What did you guys think the story was about when you were done reading it? Let's start with Gerald, since he seems to have the most issues with it.
Well, maybe that's the problem. We should have started with me. I suppose one of the things I liked about it was that, which is something I sort of like to explore myself, is the story behind the story, the people behind what you see. So I don't know what, I'm sure there's a posh word for that, but that's a sort of theme, you know, looking behind the initial appraisal you give to people, and then I'm struggling.
Then you're struggling.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Anais?
I mean, I think it's the theme of it, or the point of it, isn't that mysterious. It's pretty feminist. It's about seeing women, even though that they're beautiful, more than just by the looks that they have and the fact that they don't owe men just because they're beautiful, their attention, or anything like that. And I think maybe the reason why it might feel these days, since it's an issue that we talk about a lot, like, okay, but then when I remember, like, this is 1956, that's when it feels like, yes, you know, like, it's good that Kurt Vonnegut, as a man, was writing about this in the 50s.
Yeah. How about you, Remy?
I took it more than just about, obviously, yeah, it's there, the dynamic between beautiful women and men and women in general, I guess, but I also took it as a lesson not to judge people overall too harshly, because you don't know what they're dealing with underneath the surface.
Yeah, I took it both ways. Like, this story lends itself very easily to a feminist reading, but I also think it touches on just the universality of people on the outside seeing one thing and underneath there being something completely different. And regardless of who you are or what you're going through, everyone has, as he said, everyone is a tender bosom. Everyone has their soft spots and the things that are really hurting them, and that reflects in their behavior. I thought it was beautifully done. Very, very beautifully done. And I liked the language a great deal. Again, his language is so tight. Like, does Kurt Vonnegut ever have a word out of place? Like, ever?
I agree. It was incredibly well written. I found myself copying and pasting certain quotes and descriptions. Very authentic and genuine, the dialogue.
Yeah, and it's artistic, but it gets out of the way, doesn't it, Rammy? It's like you're reading it, and then it's like, oh, that was a genius line, and it just passed because it was just part of the story.
Yeah, and you were saying that his writing is so clean. My favorite line is only 4 words long. It's when she's yelling at the colonel, when Suzanne is yelling at him, and then you're in his point of view, and it's, she was appallingly human. I love that line.
Yes, I love that line too, actually.
Which line?
She was appallingly human.
Uh,
Yeah, that was a really, really good line. I also loved, when she goes into her little tirade, I'm not Yosemite, taxes don't support me, you don't own me, essentially, is what she's saying. And she says it in a really, really unique way, rather than just saying you don't own me, which I know many of women have said, but the way she expresses that is in a way that's very visceral.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I liked the bit where he was with his mother and she's asking about a friend of his, and he says he's at Westmire with Strategic Air Command. Said for the little dining room became as lonely as a bomber in the thin, cold stratosphere. I thought that's a lovely line. I really like that.
Yeah. There was something else that I thought was really, really well portrayed, and that is the loneliness of coming back from war, and everyone's gone, and you don't have a girlfriend, and that yearning for that companionship, I've seen it up close in person, and there was a desolate feeling around him that I thought was really, really well portrayed.
Yeah, we've had that in another story recently, haven't we? Or was it at the book club? I can't remember. Where it really showed what it's like for people returning from wars, and again that's a little hobby horse of mine, and so he's come just from 18 months away. He's gone away and he's come back, and everything's changed for him, and the town isn't what it was when he went away.
And that bristling between his mother and him, where she doesn't see that. She thinks everything's going to be back to the same. He's home. Of course he's got friends. That was just sad.
Yeah.
So, Gerald, you had issues. What was going on for you?
I thought for me, I thought the feminism thing was a little too obvious, a little heavy-handed, and he's the whole. I think I felt that there wasn't much subtlety in the main message of the story. I think it was quite. She was it was like a huge character in this small town, and small town, he did the small town thing really well, but then she was a huge and vibrant character, and I felt it sort of jarred with me, her being so big, and then he was such a strong character too. But that's, having said that, That's I mean, my mark's creeping up as we're talking about it.
I
So,
wonder if part of it is due to the time that it was written. Like, now these ideas are stuff that we've talked about as society, and now writers are approaching these topics with a lot more subtlety. But in a 1956 context, writing this topic with the subtlety of modern day writers may not have necessarily gotten the message across. And I'm wondering if part of the issue is the time period that it was written for you.
really good point. Yeah, it may be. I hadn't taken that into account, to be honest, but yeah, I think you're probably right.
I find it really interesting as we read older stories how, we look back on that literature and how different it feels reading it now compared to what it must have been like to read it then.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say, we have talked about these issues before, but they still the message is still the same. It's been since 1956 and older than this. People have been talking about this, and still it's the Colonel's perspective, the way that he spoke about
it's
Susanna.
Common.
It's common, and it kind of reminded me of the Elliot Roger thing from a few years ago.
It did me too. It did me
yes,
too. It reminded me of that.
Yeah.
It reminded me of the doxing of the female gamers. There was a sense of entitlement about them, that you owe me and you owe us and we're going to do stuff to you because we don't like what you're saying. There's this whole sense of entitlement and belonging that comes after, that type of thinking. And you're right, Elliot Rodgers definitely popped into my head. Like, I think he even said as much. Women don't, I'm doing this because I've been turned down by too many women, and maybe you should have done such and such, and then I wouldn't have done it. Like, that kind of thing. And
it even had the whole, women are choosing the wrong men. Like, the Colonel here is like, yeah, well, if I had a car and I have money and a new suit. And Elliot Rodgers did the whole, well, if I had muscles and I was awake. Like, it even had that whole, it was, the same thinking, and it's really interesting to have Kurt Vonnegut identify that exact same kind of entitled thinking in 1956, and we're still seeing it now, 60 years later.
In young people. That's the other
young
thing.
people.
It's not, we're not talking about people that were around that long. We're talking about young men that are still having this exact same train of thought. Yeah, it was very, I found it very timely in that way.
Yeah. Though I would say I probably would have agreed with Gerald that the message would have been kind of blunt and meh if it had ended just with her in the apartment setting him straight and him feeling bad. If it had ended there, I probably wouldn't have liked it as much, but it's when she turns around and she's like, no, I'm not going to walk away from this, the villain. You're going to walk me down Main Street as if you're proud of me. That was the moment where I was like, yes, her reclaiming of it and having him change his behavior publicly was what took it for me to the next level.
I kind of wanted them
I
to
found
keep
that whole
going.
section...
I would have wanted them to see them get married or something.
No.
Oh, Rammy.
Ever after.
Yeah.
Of course, he likes his ever afters, Rammy. We will turn him around eventually. Just give it time. One of the things about the ending that struck me is that it really could be read one of two ways. It could be read as her taking control and saying, you are going to change your behavior publicly. But it also could be taken away as he removed something from her that only he could give back. And that is a much less feminist reading that made me slightly uncomfortable. The idea that he took away her pride to the point that she was going to leave town. And now she's saying, walk me down the street, after she's explained that he made her feel like a whore. He made her feel like a scarlet woman. That made me feel it made me feel a little washy-washy, a little confused on where he was going with this. Could that be read as completely opposite from the rest of the story? I think it can be.
I think if they would have ended up as a couple and gotten married, that to me would have been a less feminist reading, because it's and now she has improved the man and made him better, and now because he is better, he gets woman. That narrative I wouldn't have liked as much. But if it's just
Wait, how is... Okay.
Yeah, Rammy, there's like all this literature about how like a lot of stories it's about the growth of the guy, and the reward when the guy gets to the end and grows is he gets the girl. So then if he gets the girl at the end of this, I would have been like, no. But if he doesn't get the girl and it's like she's basically saying, you called me a whore just yesterday, but today you're going to walk with me on your arm proud. That to me has a reclaiming thing, especially if she doesn't end up choosing him. It's just like you're publicly going to reverse on the thing that you said yesterday. That's why I liked it.
What I'm trying to figure out is how is the concept of improving the man less feminist?
It's using the woman as a reward. That's what the feminist literature is.
Yeah, it ceases to be about the woman's story and it becomes the story about a man being redeemed by a woman. It's kind of like the magical Negro issue where the only reason why they're there is to improve the protagonist.
Now the protagonist is less racist.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the protagonist is racist and he's confused and he's a bumbling idiot, but then a black person comes around and shows him the way and the sky opens up and he becomes a real person. It's kind of the male-female equivalent of that, where it's like the guy has problems and he hates women, but this girl turns him around and now he gets the girl. And it gets old. It's a trope. It's a trope, and it's a trope because it's common, but it does get old and is a little grating.
Yeah, and it uses women as like treats. You know, it's like if this happened in isolation, then it's just like, oh, she just ended up liking him and they got married. But it doesn't happen in isolation. So in the social context, that's why it's like, can you not do that again? Because it undermines the rest of the story.
Yeah, it would have totally taken away. I liked how big of a character she was. And even compared to modern stories, there was something about how just in her own skin she felt in the beginning of the story that I really, really enjoyed. You know, she just is walking through this tiny town with her key in her bosom and, her bells on her ankles, and she is just sashaying down that street, and she just doesn't give an F. And I love that. And in the context of the year it was written, that really impressed me because she seemed like a real person when, instead of being a caricature, because that could have been a caricature. But then he turns around and shows glimpses of her internal world and that, she's lonely too. And to me, she became a real character, and I really, really like that.
That was also very Vonnegut. Vonnegut tends to make his protagonist bigger than life. Okay, in Harrison Bergeron, like, that's the whole point of the story. Like, but in other stories by Vonnegut as well, it's kind of like everyone else is kind of a well-portrayed vision of reality. Like, this is what a small town is like. This is what people are like. And then the protagonist is like this huge caricature where, like, in your mind, they even seem to be towering over everybody else. So that, to me, is just very him.
How did you guys feel about the wise man / pharmacist?
I loved that character.
Yeah. He was, yeah, because he's a small town guy. He's a small town pharmacist. He's really embedded in the culture and in the society, but he sees a lot. He was good. He was a more subtle character, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I liked that.
He was definitely an archetype, but it was a very well done version of the archetype of the wise man that imparts wisdom on the young upstart. I thought it was really well done, and again, he was a much more subtle character. I agree with you, Gerald.
Mm.
Yeah, I think what made the wise man for me a little bit more well-rounded is first he does the whole preaching thing of like, yeah, I remember when I was young and I was frustrated by beautiful women, but then like here he is at 72 and he's still like every day setting up the newspapers for her, and it's explicitly stated that way, like this is bait to get Susanna to walk into the pharmacy shop, and I felt like that little nuance made him feel a little bit more real and likable.
More real and likable, but also it brought to mind a point of the story where her walking out every day is like the interesting thing that happens in this town. There really isn't much going on in this town, but every day at noon, this amazing, interesting girl is going to walk through town. And like, it's like clockwork. And even to the point where, when she doesn't come out and everyone's waiting, they call the firehouse where she lives above the cuckoo clock. And I thought that was a great use of that term. because it was really visual, like the door opens, the girl walks out.
Yeah.
But also it brought to mind that everyone is watching for it. You know, everyone's waiting for this girl because she's an event.
Yeah.
Everyone is quiet today.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I
I
feel like
like how the old pharmacist, how he imparted his wisdom. So it wasn't in your face, or it wasn't like overbearing or patronizing or trying to lecture him. It was I liked how it just really seemed like he was teaching him a lesson, but letting him learn it on his own type of thing.
Yeah. I got dad energy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So was there anything else in the story that stood out for anybody? We've talked about the theme, we've talked about the language.
Yeah,
I think
if
that
you-
is interesting, because as much as I enjoyed the story and as well done as the themes were, you guys are proving a point that there really was only like one or two themes. It was really simply written. You know, it was a longer story than we've read for the last few times. But even though it was more simply written and it didn't have like sub-themes and a ton of nuance, I enjoyed this story a lot more than I enjoyed the last couple stories. So what was that?
Wow.
I don't. You know, that's interesting. I think it's kind of the story sucked me in very quickly. Like sometimes even with shorter stories, the first few paragraphs, it takes a while for me to focus. Like I'll get distracted by any messenger going off or any other thing. And this one didn't. I just sort of read it and ignored everything else from start to finish. And I think it was very well paced. It just like, and then the way that Vonnegut just sort of pulls you through the story. I also noticed he builds tension pretty well. Like, oh, I need to find, there was a section where he's talking about when she's moving out, I think. He doesn't just say like, oh, and she's moving out. There's like this, I need to find it if you guys want to talk while I find the section that made me stop and look at what he's doing. And I think it's his ability. It's like he fools us into thinking he's just telling us everything in plain speak, but he's not. He is kind of like doing all these little tiny bait and hooks and little pulling you in. He's not just telling you, and then she moved out, and then he felt bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I also would like to highlight the opening sentence, because that's something that my opening sentences are not great. Like, that's something I need to work on. And so far, the stories I've read by Vonnegut all had amazing opening sentences. So I'm just going to read this. It says, Puritanism had fallen into such disrepair that not even the oldest spinster thought of putting Susanna in a ducking stool. Not even the oldest farmer suspected that Susanna's diabolical beauty had made his cow run dry. I love that. I love it for a couple reasons. One, the opening sentence is not Susanna walking down the street, which I think would be the obvious place to start the story. Susanna was a beautiful girl, and she put her rings on her toes, and she walked down the street. Like how many of us would have started the story there? You know?
That's what I mean. That's exactly what I mean.
He started it by us seeing Susanna through the town's eyes, and the fact that she is such an exception that they didn't fall back on their puritanical thoughts immediately. Like, that says something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I found the section I was talking about. It was actually... Go ahead.
No, you can go.
Me?
We're waiting for you, Anais.
Okay, yeah, so I was just saying the part that I was talking about was the screech. He doesn't just say, and then one day, Colonel whatever was sitting on the bar stool and it screeched. He sets up this whole thing about the goddamn screech. It's like, the one girl pageant had a ritual sameness until one day toward the end of summer, when the air of the drugstore was cut by a cruel, sustained screech from a dry bearing in a revolving soda fountain stool. The screech cut right through Susanna's speech about Mr. Hinckley being an angel. Like, this whole screech becomes this like weird cliffhanger mystery that he delivers in just a few sentences, because it goes on. Like, there's 2 paragraphs of just the screech before it's this guy sitting on the stool. So it creates, I think that's what kept me engaged, was it seemed like every other line was like new mini mystery. And you're like, what is the screech? So you just keep reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's a sign of a good writer who says, you know, and Fuller turned around quickly. He's not saying that, he's describing the screech of the chair, and you know from that someone has turned around quickly on this seat. So I think this is a great quote, and I can't remember who it was, but it says, "Don't show me the moonlight, show me the something reflected on the glass." Blah blah blah. And you know, it's that. It's not, you know, it's showing, not telling. It's subtly done.
Yeah, and I love, like, I was just listening to a podcast and they were talking about, they were talking about how to describe a character without them looking in a mirror when you're writing in first person. And the one thing they never brought up, and I was literally screaming this into my phone as I was listening, I was so mad, was the idea of showing a character through the eyes of other people. How they respond to that person says a lot about who that person is. And I think that's something that Kurt Vonnegut does really well. The other thing that really struck me was when she is essentially being verbally assaulted in the soda shop, her reaction, her attempt to keep her posture, her just acting confused, but you can tell, like, there's this feeling when you're being, like, accosted verbally by a strange man you don't know, where you can't show weakness because you don't know where this is going, but you're really scared on the inside, and it's this discomfort, and then when it's over, you just kind of get your ass out of there. And it was perfectly portrayed by Vonnegut, that discomfort of trying to stay strong even though inside you're just falling apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does it twice too. He also. There's a slight lag.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that quote I mentioned was Anton Chekhov. It's, "Don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on broken glass," which is exactly what Vonnegut was doing there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't find it anyway.
Anton Chekhov, who we read last week.
Yeah.
Yes, we did. No comment.
No comment.
I will read another story by him, but yeah. Last week was a thing. Last week happened.
Yeah.
I think for me, the story reminds me, just because you read one story by somebody doesn't mean, and you don't like it, doesn't mean you don't like the writer, And I think, giving writers multiple chances when you're reading their short work is really important. Each story is completely different from every other one. And, I liked the other story we read by Vonnegut. It was okay, but it did not hit me with the impact. It did not fully show his use of language in the way that the story does. His use of language, his use of how he showed the other people, how he described characters, to me was very different in the story compared to the way it was in the other story. And it was the same thing for me when I read Carver. The first Carver story I read, I put it down, I thought, why is he a big deal? And then I read more Carver, and after about 30 stories, I realized why he was a big deal. And so, there are some of these authors that maybe, we didn't rate them super high because there were things with the story that we just didn't get, but giving them a second chance with one of their other works, I think, is really important. And for me, having this be the second story that we've read by him, I thought was really interesting. Definitely something I want to do on this show, go back over some of the authors that maybe we rated a little, and find other works by them and see how we respond to it, especially after we've read so many stories now. Like, we've read so many stories at this point that I read short stories different than I did a year ago.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Okie dokie, and I think we are winding down, so are we ready to rate?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. I am going to rate this a very solid 5. I absolutely loved it. It wasn't the most, the earth didn't move for me, but it was a really good story. I really enjoyed it. I'm definitely going to come back and read more Vonnegut.
Yeah, I'm the same. I started at 4 because I liked the writing, but as we discussed it and I realised a little bit more about the story, and I've gone up to a 5 too.
I'll see your 5, and I'll raise you a 6.
I knew that was coming.
What? Oh,
Oh, Rammy.
Rammy's always a
energy
surprise.
prophecy.
He's
Yeah.
always like 0.5 or 6.
Yeah.
There's no middle ground for Rammy. He either loves it or hates it.
Mine actually came down half a point. I came in at a 5.5, and now I'm thinking just a 5.
Really?
Yeah.
What brought you down? That's interesting.
I think feeling the deadness in the conversation, where it felt a little bit like I think what excited me was when he had to walk her down on his arm after like yelling at her the day before. I really liked that, so that gave me the 5.5. But okay, sure, that was cool. But you know, it felt a little bit like
it's not a conversation prompting story, which surprised me. I thought coming into this conversation that was going to be really lively and that everyone's going to have a lot to say. And as we started talking, it again seemed to be a much more simple story that didn't really lend itself to discussion because its themes were so just point blank and out in the open. There wasn't a lot to decipher.
Yeah. So yeah, 5 for me as well.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. So this week we have a 4-question quiz. So we're going to do. So we have a question for each person and a tiebreaker, and we're going to steal. We are going to steal.
Wow.
So, and we're going to steal in an order. So,
Exciting.
what we're going to do, I have picked a number between 1 and 100. 1 second, let me type it. But I'm not putting it in the chat. It's just saved so you guys can see. I have a legitimate number picked. Okay? You guys are going to pick a number. Whoever's the closest, not whoever's lowest or whatever, whoever is the closest to the number will go first, whoever's the second closest will go second, whoever's the third closest will go third, and we will steal in that order.
We'll
Ready?
steal in that order? Why doesn't
Yes, we will steal in that order.
Steal?
So, if you get a question and you miss it, then whoever's the next person steals in that order. We steal in the order that we get. So, everybody, what are your guesses?
Yeah, let's just do it.
Say them out loud and post them in chat. So
1 to 100?
Yes, between 1 and 100.
60.
42.
Okay, Gerald said 42, Rammy said 1, and he said 60. And the answer is 37. So Gerald is first.
Ooh.
And 1 second, how many will wait?
Anais.
60 minus 37. Yeah, Anais is second, Rammy is third. Hey, I don't even have to try to remember the order. It's the order of chat. That works in my favor because I'm just not that good.
Okay.
So here are the questions. Here's the first question. Okay, I'm going to give you a quote that an author said. You're going to guess what author said it. There's no multiple choice.
Oh wow.
That's why they're stealing. Okay. Now, I'm thinking these are pretty well-known quotes. I'm thinking we're gonna get these. Okay. So the first one is describing friendship between this author's character. This author said, "There is conflict, as there is with all human relationships. Even the deepest and warmest friendship will be subject to trials. What marks a really great friendship is not that it never had an argument or never saw any conflict, but it's how you deal with those things." Who said it? Gerald?
I don't know.
Oh, come on! You know this. Dig
No, I
deep.
don't. I don't know. Ray Bradbury.
Nah. Okay. Anais, seal it.
I'm just guessing. I don't know. Jane Austen?
No. Rammy.
I have no idea.
Do you mind repeating it?
Okay. I'm going to repeat it. There is conflict as there is with all human relationships. Even the deepest and warmest friendships will be subject to trials. What marks a really great friendship is not that it never had an argument or never saw any conflict, but it's how you deal with those things. It's a really recent quote.
Audrey. Oh, what? That's
Oh, it's
not
recent?
Audrey Hepburn. That's what I was gonna say.
That's your guess?
Yeah.
Okay. The answer is J.K. Rowling.
Oh.
I figured these were all really famous quotes, so I thought you guys would know this. I may have to come up with another quiz last minute. Okay. You guys may just fuck me on this. Okay, Anais.
Like it's
Sorry. Anais,
Yeah.
feel free to cut that. The second quote is, this author found out that a crafter had cut the corners of his books to decorate a box. The author said, it has always been my belief that people who spend too much time with my work end up as lost souls, drained of reason, who lead lives of raving emptiness and occasional lunatic violence. What a relief to see this is documented.
This needs to be multiple choice.
Who said that? Can we get clues if it's a modern, alive or dead?
It is a modern
alive
writer.
or dead.
Modern children.
Oh.
Those are your clues.
Neil Gaiman. Kind of children, kind of not.
No. And Gerald?
Wait, isn't it my turn next?
No, we steal in order. You steal last. It's okay.
Alright, whatever.
Terry Pratchett?
No, Remy?
I don't even know. Roald Dahl.
Close. Lemony Snicket.
Okay.
Okie dokie. So, Ramy, here's the next one, and I obviously am horrible at picking quizzes. We have learned this on the podcast. Thank
It's
you
fine,
for
just make it
confirming.
multiple choice. At least then we have.
Okay. That's what I thought that letting people steal would fix that problem. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
After reading, again, this is a children's author. After reading The False Prince, this author said, for me, it had a great surprise at the end, but everyone I've given it to, they call me and say they guessed the surprise on page 22. I write this stuff, but I can never figure it out when I'm reading a mystery. I'm always surprised. It's hilarious. I fall for everything.
These aren't even like well-known quotes. I don't know what the guy wrote on page 22. What is this?
There was a bunch of clues in the quote. Ramy.
Tell me
Children's
your
author.
two cues. Alright, children's and what's
He's
the
reading
second?
mysteries. I write this shit. Children's author. Come on, you got this, Ramy. You got this. You're
I don't
young.
even know any children's
He was
author.
within your time period.
I was desperate.
R.L. Stein.
Thank freaking goodness. We got one. We got
Oh,
one.
really?
Wow.
What? Wow.
There aren't that many
Number
children's
one.
mystery writers.
Number one.
Wow.
Hey,
Well
I'm
done,
lighting
Ramy.
my lighter for you. You are the champions.
Wow.
Just call it. Just call it. No one's gonna
Yeah.
get
No.
this.
There's one more. There's one more.
What?
Yeah.
Oh,
You don't want to do
Okay.
You don't want. Well, we only got one. Do we want to
Go
hear the
on.
tiebreaker question?
Go on.
Do we want to hear the question?
Yes.
It won't count. It won't count. I just want to see
Get
if
on with
anybody
it.
can get it.
Go
Okay.
on.
When this author got a letter from the ASPCA about his or her dog, the author replied, "You asked about Minnie's name, sex, breed, and phone number. She doesn't answer the phone. She's a Dutch hound and can't reach it. But she wouldn't answer it even if she could, as she has no interest in outside calls." Does anybody want to take a guess?
No.
Everyone's like, no. That
The
was
thing is,
really
what's a
funny.
tiebreaker?
That
How would
was the-
someone?
That
How would
was
you?
the writer of Charlotte's Web.
Hold
I
on.
love that quote. Hella funny. So, Ramy, what are we going to read next week? Because I fail.
It's
Great.
the the story that was suggested to me by my friend Molly that I nominated last week, and it's called Strays by Mark Richard.
Okay. Is it short or is it
Okay.
long?
It's 12 pages.
Okay.
All right.
That's longer than your usual. I'll withhold judgment.
But it's 12 like PDF sort of like shorter things. It's
Okay.
not,
For a
like,
second there, I thought
full.
you were gonna say it was like 12 like haiku-sized pages.
I'm pretty sure it's under the word limit, but I don't know. Even if it's not, we'll just read it.
Okay, Anais, take it away.
Okay. But before you go, tell us about the beautiful woman who tortured your adolescence in the comment section at literaryroadhouse.com. And we have a pageant of gorgeous babes in the review section for this show on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spreaker. Leave a comment to see them. Or if you or someone you know is a beautiful woman in need of a safe space to talk about books without being judged on looks, check out our other shows, the Literary Roadhouse Book Club and the Bradbury Challenge. Our podcast, like Susanna, needs a few cosmetics to allow natural assets to shine. Support our expenses at patreon.com/literaryroadhouse. Every bit helps. And as always, share this podcast with a romantically frustrated colonel in your life. Until next time, read a good story.
Okay, not only was that an awesome outro, but do you see what happened, like, literally just as the podcast ended?
Oh.
I've got rain just pouring down on me. Everything is crazy. I'm just like, whoa.
Whoa.
There's
I
like,
see that plant behind you going crazy.
yeah, it's kind of like, whoa, the sky just opened up and all the water fell out.
And the angels sang. Or some maybe the angels didn't sing.
Cried.
The
We're
angels
flooded.
took a leak on you, yeah.
By the way, guys, Gail is here if you didn't look. If you didn't notice, she's
Hi,
here.
Gail. Oh,
Hi,
no.
Gail.
Oh, wow, it's freaky. I'm so glad that she found us.
I tagged her specifically. I was like, Gail.
Come
Here we are. Yeah, I was trying to keep the chat window open, and every time I did, my video slowed down.
Okay, this is so much better than Blab. Like, just the improvements that Google Hangouts and YouTube has made since the last time we used it, I can already tell the difference.
It's huge.
I had multiple windows. I was tweeting, I had YouTube, I had Google Hangouts. It was amazing.
I couldn't have done that before.
No.
You really could not have done that before. And I don't know when they brought the chat back, because when they cut the chat, a lot of people left, and they were very vocal about the reason why they were leaving. And I'm wondering if that's why they brought the chat back. It sucks that it no longer, like, when the podcast is over, the chat doesn't become, like a comment anymore. But it's still good that at least we have it. Okay, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Bye.
Stay dry.
Bye.
Stay bad.
Stay safe.